Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, I sued my boss because he fired me for wanting to attend a concert. Some backstory: during my gap year between studies, I decided to work for Company N. Company N was run by a husband, Dave, and wife, Karen, with their son, and basically treated their staff like a small family. All was well for about 2 months, until I realized I had to ask for a day off since I wanted to attend the last Slayer concert the band would give in my country. There was about a month to go, so I sent an email asking for the day off and explaining why. This is where everything started to go downhill. I got a reply from the Karen, and her reply was weird. She stated that's not how asking for a day off works. I was confused, to say the least. Not sure what to do. I thought she wanted a more formal way of asking, so I wrote a formal email asking for the day off. She shot an email back. I really had to think it through what I was doing, which made even less sense to me. But I was hopeful since I never really got a specific no. The next workday rolls around. I arrived, locked up my bike, and headed inside ready for work. I immediately started looking for Dave to ask for answers. Before I could even open my mouth, he asked me, "Do you still want to go to that concert?" I didn't expect him to ask this, so quickly answered, "Yes." The only thing he said back was, "Okay, take off your vest and you can go home." I was stunned. And while the words started to sink in, I looked at my colleagues, which were just preparing for opening. When it finally sank in, anger flowed in. I am not a confrontal person, so I simply took off my vest and gave it to Dave. Without a word, I left and started biking home. When I got back home, I told my mother what happened. We started sending emails for extra information and got very Karen-like emails back. After a couple emails which went basically nowhere, I looked up the laws for immediate dismissal. After reading up about it, I learned that, in my country, somebody can only be immediately fired when caught stealing, frauding, the person isn't able to do the work, or refusal to do the work. I did neither of these. A day or two later, I met with my attorney and began the steps to sue Company N. I told my lawyer what happened in detail, and he was very confident I was in my right and she was not. So after trading even more emails between the three of us, we went to small claims. I came prepared in a suit with my attorney in tow. And Karen showed up, alone. I guess she assumed she won because she thought she was in her right. The trial began and I was as professional and objective as I could be. Karen did the same. Well, for about half of the trial. When she realized evidence was piling up against her, she resorted to calling me an idiot, among other things. I'm safe to say that was the point the judge ruled in my favor. As per usual, I had to wait a month before I got the verdict black on white in the mail, but I won. It may have taken about 6 months from the moment I was told to go home to the point those 6 months of pay were transferred to my bank account. But it was 100% worth it. In the end, I went to the concert. It was the most awesome and most profitable concert I have ever been to in my life. The next one is titled, Fine, we won't park on your driveway while making a delivery. Make things inconvenient for them, and they'll make things inconvenient for you. To explain, I work for a national wine retailer, mainly as a delivery driver. We offer free delivery straight to your door when you order from our store. In the before times, this meant maybe 10 deliveries every few days to our local catchment, as most people purchase in store. However, because we have been shut to customers for the last few months, it means between 30 to 40 deliveries per day, 6 days a week. On to the customer, let's call her Susan. Susan orders regularly, a bit too regularly, and has made it abundantly clear to both our drivers, our store manager, our customer service team, and HQ that we are unequivocally not allowed to maneuver onto her driveway during deliveries. Her house is at the end of a cul-de-sac with a driveway technically shared between 5 houses as a sort of branching design, so it's quite away from the main road. I had the pleasure of delivering during a particularly stormy day. The wind was driving the rain sideways, instant flash flooding across the county. I was P*SS wet through after the first stop, and this was now only number 24 of 39. I was already not a happy bunny when reading the next address. My heart sank as I realized I would be carrying large crates of beer and boxes of wine by hand roughly 100 feet to Susan's front door, about 7 relays in total. Rolling up to said address, my head went, "Duck it," and I reversed the van all the way to Susan's house. I braced myself against the seat to open my door into what I can only imagine being a lonely sock feels like inside a washing machine. My glasses were instantly blown from my face, and as I scrambled to find them in the rising inches of water, I hear a scream from above. Terrified that some poor person had been gusted into the upper atmosphere, I whip around to see Susan, protected by an umbrella, leaning out of her bedroom window shrieking at me to get my van off her property. I shout back that I have a delivery for her. My words snatched away by the wind, and I point to the logo on the van, but to no avail. Susan continues her harpy like a crescendo. Fine, I think to myself, if I can't park on your driveway, you can come and pick up your booze from the road. I give Susan a sarcastic salute, jump in the van and park back on the main road. Content: Susan meanders her substantial mass down to her front door and opens the porch in anticipation. While staring dead at her, I open the back doors of the van and begin neatly stacking her boxes on the road in the biggest puddle I could reach. Susan explodes at me. Though, through the gale force wind, I can't hear the particular words of abuse she's screeching. I give a cheery wave, hop back in the van, and wheel spin off, heart pounding like my bungee cord had just snapped mid-jump. The rest of the day is going wetly, and I get a phone call from my manager. Susan has called in to file a complaint against me, ordered that I be fired, and called me a bunch of highly offensive and derogatory names, as well as insulting the wider company and questioning the effectiveness of female delivery drivers, to my female manager. She was so offensive that my manager couldn't get out of her what the actual problem was and ended the rage dial by calmly explaining to Susan that she is no longer a customer with us and to never contact us again. Just to clear up a few things, Susan's house had a free parking space opposite her front door, so I would not have blocked anyone else in. I left the delivery on the pavement, not in front of potential traffic. This was in the UK, so no hoa. The engine would have been off during the delivery. It's also a small van, the size of a normal car. Susan has never given a reason for not allowing us on her driveway, and no one else ever has. The next one is titled, "Won't Let Me Save the Company Money?" Your problem, not mine. Several years ago, I worked for a government contractor and traveled extensively. Usually, it was for meetings in godforsaken places, but sometimes it was somewhere cool or to spend time on a ship, sometimes both. For one such ship ride, I was to board an aircraft carrier in Japan, sail to Guam, and get a flight from the ship to the island before flying home. If you've never been a non-essential passenger on an aircraft carrier, you don't get a departure time when you're planning your trip. You get a departure window of several days, and you only get to know for sure the day before your flight. So, I knew a range of dates that I might arrive on Guam. The plan was to book a hotel for all 4 nights, and until we knew we were flying the next day, to just push the reservation back before the deadline. Once we had the date, we would move our flights home to the next day to only spend 1 night in a hotel. My boss made his reservation at a Days Inn while we discussed this plan in his office. He said it was the only hotel on our travel site that was within the per diem limit, so I should book soon. By the time I was at my desk, the last room was gone, and the only hotel available through our corporate travel site was a junior presidential suite at a pricey beach resort that ran somewhere around a luxurious $1,400 per night. I looked around budget travel sites and direct booking with a few hotels, but there was a major fleet exercise happening around the island and hotels were packed. There were even rumors that they would set up tents on unused airstrips to house all the Marines coming in. I told our travel department all of this and proposed that I book an Airbnb with the caveat that I would have to pay for all 4 nights, even if I only stayed for 1, but that it would still be $1,000 cheaper than 1 night at the only hotel available. My proposal was raised to the head of the travel department, who wrote back rather aggressively that if I booked an Airbnb, I would only be reimbursed for the night I actually stayed there and that I would not be reimbursed at all if I booked the expensive hotel. My instructions were to call our travel office when I landed, and they would find whatever was available and that a room within the per diem rate would surely become available. Fast forward to landing in Guam. The first call I made was to change to the next possible flight home, but I had missed the last one of the day, so I called the travel office. Of course, with my luck, the person who answered was new, and by new, I mean she had started while I was on the ship. She looks it up and says there are no rooms available. I told her I was pretty sure there was 1 room available, and she replied, "Well, yes, but it's way over the per diem rate." I explained everything and told her to ask the head of her department and that he knew the situation. After a long hold, she came back and said that I had a couple of options. I could search around by myself for an Airbnb that was within per diem, see if my boss would let me stay in his room on a cot, or she could book the suite, and I would be reimbursed in full. So, on my expense report, I made a special note that I had no transportation expenses to get to the airport in Guam because my hotel room came with a private car. The only fallout was that they got very picky about my expense reports for a while. I was pretty by the book business traveler, so it usually wasn't an issue, but one time, a hotel I booked was 1 cent per night over the per diem limit, so they rejected my entire expense report. I filled out a new one. It was a terrible online system, so I couldn't just edit the old one, explaining that I would pay the excess out of pocket in line with policy. I also forwarded the rejection email to my boss, CCing the head of travel and asking which budget code I should charge for the half hour it took to rectify this 4 cents mistake. You don't need to know my hourly rate to know that it cost the company substantially more than 4 cents. He gave me his managerial budget, and funny enough, they stopped questioning my expenses after that. The last one is titled, "The Professors Tried to Screw Me Out My Degree, so I got them both chucked out." A little background. After disappointing my parents in high school with dismal academic scores and a serious predilection for teenage rebellion, I ended up in a small-town college with a close-knit Christian community, pursuing a degree in media studies. It wasn't the best place I could be, but it was a fair compromise between my father's demand that I learn a paying skill and my own yearnings for liberation. Very quickly into this graduation program, I realized it was a waste and college was going to be a massive bore. So I spent most of my time courting gullible women or smoking drugs. I am the kind of straggler who puts in the bare minimum so as not to upset the balance of the universe, and thus I made it to my final year without much of a fuss. This is when 2 new characters entered my life. First was a new male professor, an external faculty, a scrawny slimy fellow, SSF henceforth. He taught a major paper and was very well connected with the local church, which had a lot of say in the college administration. On Sundays, he moonlighted as pastor for a small branch of the big church. SSF also had a reputation for acting fresh with boys. I laughed about it with my friends, until one day SSF made a pass at me. And not a verbal one. I pushed him off me, and reminded him he is a teacher and asked him to get his act together. SSF backed off, told me he was sorry. He had misread the signs. I cooled off, told him there were no signs, apologized for my abuses, and that was that. Or so I thought. But more on that later. The second entry was a new lecturer, a garrulous young woman. Let's call her Rose. She was fresh out of university, had worked a few odd jobs, and had landed this lecturing gig through some connection in the church. She was from town, had studied in this college and knew the dean of the department well. Rose and I got off on the wrong foot to start with, a debate on art going off-hand, as I found her imagining Christian motifs and theology in Picasso. She put me down, I didn't mind. I wasn't too interested either. But just to spite her, I kept turning up essays rebutting her points, and she kept marking me harshly, supplementing the dismal marks with juicy opinions on what she thought of my intellect. It became a game between us. Now I would like to imagine Rose had a roving eye, as she seemed to favor the young, good-looking boys and really put down the girls in the class. Except one. Jess had been a classmate of ours and she was a local. So, she did not shack on campus and had kept a low profile. She did not shine, but she wasn't disliked either. Suddenly, after Rose's joining college, Jess started to shine in academics. Happens often when the teacher is right for the student. Rose marked her extremely high for a few assignments, and this got a lot of nerds in class really jittery, who saw a new challenger in Jess for the crown of Nerd King, Queen. Some of them even read the assignments that Jess has turned in and found them highly incoherent. Nothing explained the grades she was getting. This did not bother me, as grades and nerd drama was never my thing. But then, by a stroke of misfortune, one of our other professors, who taught us 2 other papers, met with an accident and was off action for almost 2 months. A temp was hard to find, and since most of her teaching workload in those 2 months was going to be practical-oriented, Rose very gallantly volunteered to fill in for her. Which, it still fathoms me, she was allowed to. What it meant was that Rose was now grading our assignments and papers for 3 subjects, and suddenly Jess' fortunes really turned. From being a challenger to the crown, she became the nerd queen, with her cumulative grades putting her on top of the pile. Jess just smiled through it all and made it out to be her hard work finally getting recognized. A small coterie started to gather around her. It still didn't bother me. My universe was still in balance. Then one day, one of our batchmates saw Rose and Jess hanging out after college. They were shopping in some malls. Said batchmate decided to lurk around and find out what was cooking. Imagine his surprise when he saw them walk out of the mall and take the taxi together. Imagine his greater surprise when he followed them to find out enter the same household. Picture the pure shock for the entire batch when a day later we were all told that Jess and Rose are sisters. Ducking blood sisters. Born of the same parents. All of them still living under the same roof. Somehow both sisters had conveniently forgotten to bring it up around others when they were in college. They had pulled this subterfuge for about 4 to 5 months now. A bunch of nerds ganged up and approached the dean for our courses and brought her up to date to this scenario. Turns out Dean knew all along about them being siblings and had actually encouraged Rose and Jess not to talk about it, so as not to fan talks of conflicts of interest. And now she refused to believe that Rose was being partial to her sister. I think she didn't want to go the trouble of replacing Rose. The nerds were heartbroken. But I was still laughing. In Rose and Jess, I saw a kind of petty evilness that I could appreciate. Then, for one of the papers that Rose was covering, we were assigned a practical project that required teamwork. I was put in the group with a girl I fancied, and to impress her, for once I threw my minimum effort policy out of the window. We worked on it together and our young adult rom-com had just begun taking shape. By the time we submitted the project together, this girl and I were very much into each other. Then Rose walked in and took a sh*t on the project. She made it part of our game and added those choicest expletives in her remarks for both of us, that she had so far reserved only for me. Needless to say, Jess got top marks with her sh*tty effort. It broke my girl's heart. She sobbed on my shoulder, my gallantry came into question, and I was finally ready to settle some scores with Rose. But nothing major. Just a little sticking it to the man. As I have mentioned, this story is from 13 years ago. About then, the world was waking up to social media and our college was not too far behind. In fact, our department had quite a chattery group on one such social media site that does not exist anymore, but used to be named after a Middle Eastern Google engineer. Rose and Jess were not in the group, but some of the faculty were. I started writing and posting long satirical sketches of Rose that ridiculed her teaching abilities and poked at her extra love for baby sister. I was hoping to get some of the faculty to take notice, but mostly I just wanted to be *CK to the sisterhood. A few days in, the posts generated a lot of laughs amongst the students on the group, but the faculty stayed away. Not be discouraged, I wrote my worst stinker of a skit caricaturing Rose. I will be honest, I wasn't kind and didn't mince my words. It was a nasty piece of work, meant to hurt. I wrote it, posted it, gloated with a few buddies who commented and forgot all about it. Here, I need to pause in my narrative, and tell you folks about another stroke of misfortune that befell me at this point. One fine lazy afternoon, between classes, I had rolled myself a little something special and smoked that thing in the college loo. As I stepped out, after washing my eyes, I found the familiar face of SSF grinning at me. With all the mischief and slime he could muster. The air around us reeked of smoke and SSF's grin grew broader. He told me what my options were. He could A. tell my parents, B. tell the college, C. tell the cops. Or D. I could give him a sexual favor and he would forget about it altogether. I thought he must be joking, but SSF held that stupid grin and slunk out of the loo, stoned and slightly scared, TBH. I had no time to worry about any of this as I started getting frantic calls from batchmates. Rose and Jess had found out about the group and my posts. Jess has made a few crying calls to people. And Rose was livid. The group's moderator, one of our batchmates, panicked and deleted the entire thread. I was summoned by the dean for an emergency meeting. When I arrived in her room, Rose and Jess were already there, sobbing bucket loads, calling me names, and holding up printouts of my posts. I had come prepared for this and proceeded to decimate their complaint with a well-constructed and elaborate speech on how Rose's nepotism is severely bad for the institution and student morale, and that I was only questioning her actions. Satire was just my tool to do so. Well, you see, my well-thought-out arguments didn't appeal to the dean. She didn't even know what nepotism meant and I had to explain the word to her. I am not making this up. This dean is now a local councilwoman. She told me that I had slandered Rose's good name and brought disrepute to the college with my actions. They would have to throw me out. This I was not expecting. I had thought my speech would do the trick. I panicked. After all the effort dawdling through this course, I needed the degree. Then gathering my wits, I told the dean that my opinions weren't just mine alone. The nerds had brought it to her attention as well. The dean tried to play it down, saying the nerd issue had been dealt with, but I called BS on that. I demanded she involve my entire class to see whether they would back me up on this. Rose said they won't. Jess was sure too. The dean agreed, thinking this will sort the mess simply. No class would gang up against faculty. Like all bad managers, she did not realize that her stopgap quick-fix solution would open a can of worms. I was playing a gamble. I had no idea what my class would say. Sure, some of them had laughed and commented on the posts, but would they really stand up for me? I had no idea I was even that liked. But I guess the class had enough of Rose. Or they just liked my satire. Bottom line is, when Dean assembled the class and called a vote on the matter, our entire class, apart from Jess, agreed that Rose was unfair and nepotistic. They backed me up. I had never been particularly attached to my class except the girl. But now I could kiss each of them. The dean had to agree that maybe, just maybe, Rose was unfit for the job. A departmental inquiry had to be instituted so that these charges could be heard. I wasn't going to be thrown out after all. Rose was not happy and I think she went to church with it. For soon I found myself in front of the president of the college, along with Rose and the dean. Rose painted it to seem like I had turned the class against her and I had inflicted psychological damage on Jess. The president consulted the dean, heard all that had happened and decided to let the inquiry make up its own mind. At this point, I began to suspect the department inquiry was going to be heavily stacked against me. As an added bonus, the president decided that the college needed an internet communication policy, a protocol on what students and teachers can say or discuss about the college and its functioning over social media and the internet. It was to include rules on how students and teachers interacted over the internet and recommend punishment for misdemeanors. This was still the nascent stages of social media, folks. Colleges didn't know what to do back then. Most of the college did not know about this internet code being formulated. I did because the dean and Rose had both taken out time from their busy teaching schedules to inform me that as soon as this internet code had been formulated, I would be chucked out for my actions. My days in college were numbered. My girl cried more on my shoulder. I felt like a tragic hero, a champion of the people, who will take the fall for his brethren. My class mourned me. In this state of mind, I returned to my dorm to find an email from SSF. He wanted to know what I had decided about his offer. In all this Rose social media fiasco, this crap had completely slipped my mind. I wanted to write back telling SSF to duck off. Now that I was getting chucked out, his threats didn't matter. But then something struck me. I started exchanging emails with SSF and realized he had no idea about the Rose thing or the impending internet code. He was an external faculty. This was God sent. You see where all this is going now. Well, suffice to say, that over the next couple of days, over a series of emails with SSF, I discussed my apprehensions about the offer and my hesitations as I was not gay. I played the scared victim here, and let him coax me into giving in to his demand. Honestly, I was just baiting him. And waiting for the president's code to roll out. Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, our college unveiled its internet policy, banning social media for both students and teachers alike, and the usual set of guidelines to follow while interacting on the internet. By now I had gathered enough dirt on SSF. So, when the president summoned me for a disciplinary hearing under the new internet code, I sat down and wrote the speech I was going to give to the president. My girl was in on this and she helped me with it. Once I was confident about what to say, I printed out the email exchange, neatly bounded it all together into one file and headed to the president a little before the appointed hour. I met him and showed him the entire email exchange. I wanted to know how SSF's emails to me scored on this internet codebook. Would it look good if I had to drag the professor, a pastor at that, and the college to court for sexual harassment? What would a good Christian town say about that? That did the trick. His tone changed, he saw my angle in all of this and promised action. I also told the president that the dean sucked at her job, which is why creeps like SSF and nepotistic sh*ts like Rose ran riot. Now I didn't want any of them, Rose, the dean or SSF, to be able to screw my career. The president assured me that they won't be left capable to do that, but I had to keep my mouth shut about those emails. I took the deal. A week later, I signed a non-disclosure with the college, handed them all the printouts and deleted my emails under their lawyer's supervision. SSF's contract with the college was terminated and he was expelled from his church. No one knew why. His life was destroyed, he hasn't had a job since, and last heard, he was living with and off his mother. The dean was let go, and she discovered a second career in politics and went on to become a councilwoman, which she still is. Rose was let go as well, while Jess finished college quietly without much fuss. Last heard, both sisters together run a store in town. I graduated with distinctions in all papers that Rose and SSF handled, thanks to the president's intervention. Which put me pretty high on the merit list. And made the nerds jealous. I was just a pesky senior who screwed up but got lucky when a professor hit on me. And yes, the college had a new internet usage policy. Thanks for listening.